Every year, thousands of people travel abroad for holidays. Some like to spend their time on a sunny beach. Others like to tour around and see the sights. But tourism isn't a modern invention. People were traveling abroad many centuries ago and came home, just as we do, with exciting stories to tell about the things they had seen. For tourists in the ancient world, the most exciting things to be seen were one or more of what we now call the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Huge, magnificent buildings or structures which showed how skillful and imaginative their creators were, and what marvelous things they could make out of stone and other materials. Not everyone agreed about what the 7 wonders were. There were several different lists, which together named up to 16 different sites. The best known were put together in the 2nd century BC.
There did gradually come to be a fairly standard list with 7 items on it, but on some of the lists you'll get 1 or 2 of the wonders have dropped off and alternative ones have been put in their place.
Quite often we have the walls of Babylon as well as the Hanging Gardens. The Pyramids of Alexandria is one that quite often doesn't figure, so there seems to have been a great fluidity in what constituted the 7 wonders. Roman authors put in Roman things, so the Capitol and the Colosseum tended to get there. And then Christians got in Noah's Ark or Solomon's Temple. So it always fixed a bit, but the number 7 seemed to be the one that they always wanted to come up with.
But whatever sites they chose, there was one wonder most people agreed about: the 3 huge pyramids built at Giza by the pharaohs or kings of ancient Egypt. You can still see the pyramids today. These 3 enormous triangular-sided structures are the tombs in which the pharaohs who built them were buried. The largest of them, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, was built over 4,500 years ago and is the highest and most ancient stone structure in the world. The pyramids, the first of the 7 wonders, may still be here for us to see today and have survived perhaps because they were not in a dangerous area. The other 6 were not so lucky. One of them, the statue of the Greek god Zeus at Olympia, where the ancient Olympic Games were held, stood for only a few years after it was placed in the Temple of Zeus in 430 BC. After only 4 years, the temple was destroyed, possibly in war, and some archaeologists believe that the statue was destroyed with it. Others think it survived for a bit longer, but was destroyed by fire 50 years later in 376 BC. Another wonder of the ancient world, the giant bronze statue of the sun god Helios, known as the Colossus of Rhodes, fell to the ground during an earthquake in about 225 BC. The statue lay where it had fallen for nearly 900 years. Then, in 653 AD, it was broken up by Arab raiders, and its bronze was sold as scrap metal. The same happened to the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, a huge tomb which was wrecked by an earthquake about 1,700 years after it was constructed. Later, its stones were used to make houses in the area close by. The Pharos, or Lighthouse at Alexandria in Egypt, was still there in the 12th century after nearly 1,500 years. But by 1477, it had become a ruin, for in about that year, an Egyptian sultan, Qaid Bey, used its stones to build a fort. This statue, depicting Artemis, the Greek goddess of young people, once stood in the Temple of Artemis, the 4th of the ancient wonders. You can see how it looked because it was copied many times before the temple was destroyed in 262 AD, after the barbarian Goths invaded Turkey. Nothing is left of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, another wonder of the ancient world, which is usually counted as second only to the Great Pyramids at Giza. At one time, people were not sure that the gardens ever existed. Then, in 1899, a German archaeologist called Robert Keldeve, working in Babylon, claimed he had discovered proof that the Hanging Gardens were real.
Certainly when I was exploring that area and earlier, no one had found anything which you could say these were the gardens. Keldeve, however, just by the river, found very massive foundations, and they were never satisfactorily explained, though I've identified those later with the basis of what would have been the arched basis for the foundation of the gardens.
There is a good reason why the Seven Wonders were all situated in a fairly small area in and around the Eastern Mediterranean. To the writers who described them, this was the ancient world, the place where civilization spread out from Mesopotamia and Egypt, across the sea to Greece, and much later westwards to Rome in Italy. In time, great cities were built, and in them art, sculpture, architecture, literature, mathematics, and other skills developed. Powerful kings arose as rulers, as they did in ancient Egypt. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt were rich as well as powerful, but what they wanted most of all was to be remembered after they were dead. But they would not leave their wealth behind. After death, they wanted to be surrounded by the same magnificence and luxury they had when they had lived. These were the ideas which lay behind the construction of the pyramids at Giza, where the bodies of the pharaohs were specially preserved before they were buried with huge amounts of treasure, gold, silver, jewelry, and precious objects of all kinds. When Khufu, the second pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, came to the throne, Old Kingdom Egypt was at the peak of its magnificence. And Khufu's pyramid was a mirror of this magnificence.
Now we are in front of the Great Pyramid, which built by King Khufu, second king of the 4th dynasty, over than 2600 BC. And this one actually was considered like a miracle or a wonder of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, still standing until now.
Built from more than 2 million limestone blocks, it covered an area of over 13 acres and reached a height of nearly 500 feet. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, who lived in the 5th century BC, 100,000 workers labored to build Khufu's pyramid, which took 20 years to complete. The effort all this took was tremendous. Each of the limestone blocks weighed about 2.5 tons and were quarried many miles up the Nile River. The Great Pyramid and the tremendous amount of work it took to build proved one important thing. Pyramid building was neither fast nor easy. This was why later pharaohs allowed plenty of time for the construction of their own pyramids. In fact, building started almost as soon as a pharaoh came to the throne and continued throughout his life. The middle pyramid of the 3 great structures at Giza was the tomb of Khufu's son, Khafre, the 4th king of the 4th dynasty, which was built to a height of about 475 feet. The third, the Pyramid of Menkaure, the 6th king, was the smallest, at a height of only 215 feet. Each of the 3 was originally covered in an outer skin of smooth white limestone, but robbers soon removed it, and all that is left of this casing is a small amount of limestone at the top of Menkare's pyramid. Like the pyramids, the Hanging Gardens were probably the work of a rich and powerful king, Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon in the 6th century BC.
If the classical sources are correct, and the Hanging Gardens were built at about 600 BC, the ruler at that point was Nebuchadnezzar, and he's in fact responsible for pretty much all of the buildings we can currently see at Babylon, as they're sort of the remains. And Babylon at that point was about, it was the biggest city that had ever been built.
Nebuchadnezzar had a special reason for building the gardens inside the royal palace. His wife, Queen Amethyst, came from Media, which today lies in northwest Iran. Media was a land full of mountains, forests, and flowers, but Babylon was dry and flat. Amethyst missed the lovely green countryside of her homeland. So, to make her happy, Nebuchadnezzar created a small copy of it. In an area about 400 feet square and nearly 25 meters high, he constructed roof gardens, sloping down in a series of terraces, lush green lawns, banks of flowers, and streams, just like the lovely mountain scenery of Amethyst's home.
The accounts vary quite a bit for the Hanging Gardens. One thing they seem to agree upon is that it was a rising set of terraced gardens. It seems to have been a rising series of galleries with the gardens planted on top, and one of the sources talks about the light that could come into these galleries so that these themselves could have almost a pavilion structure.
Some of the trees in the Hanging Gardens were up to 80 feet high. But the big problem for Nebuchadnezzar and his engineers was how to keep the gardens green and fresh. There was not much rainfall in Babylon, but fortunately there was the nearby Euphrates River, so an irrigation system was constructed.
How they raised the water has been the matter of great scientific debate. I personally think that at the least they had what the Assyrians and Babylonians called the shadoof method, which was that on each level a bucket on a hinge would take the water up, and then it would be emptied at the next level, and then the same would go on up all the levels.
The Pyramids of Egypt and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were amazing technical achievements. They proved that human cleverness and ingenuity were already well advanced thousands of years ago. The great statue of Zeus, the third of the ancient wonders, was another task of this same ambitious kind. It took 8 years to construct, and its size and richness were immense. The statue was almost 40 feet high and was covered in gold and ivory. It showed Zeus, the father of the Greek gods, sitting on a giant throne.
The statue of Zeus at Olympia was made so that the outer surface of it would appear of gold and ivory, but the internal structure would have been made of a framework of wood to support the ivory and gold.
Obviously those materials were extremely valuable materials in the ancient world. Gold, a valuable material, ivory, not native to Greece and therefore an exotic material. And when we were dealing with a statue on the scale of the statue of Zeus, some 40 feet high, we're talking about large quantities of these materials.
The sculptor who made this magnificent statue was called Phidias, and this was one of his great masterpieces. Phidias lived and worked in Athens between about 490 and 430 BC, and he was probably the most famous sculptor of his time. the fourth wonder of the ancient world. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus in Turkey was built in about 550 BC for Croesus, king of Lydia, a man who was famous for his huge wealth. The Temple of Artemis certainly had everything money could buy in the ancient world, except security. The first temple was destroyed in a battle soon after it was built. The second managed to survive for nearly 2 centuries, until it was burned down in 356 BC. Once again, the Temple of Artemis had to be rebuilt. Pliny the Elder described it as an enormous marble structure, almost 430 feet long. Pliny counted 127 columns, which rose nearly 60 feet from the base of the temple to the roof.
So the effect would have been a forest of these tall, Ionic style columns, which would have made the building seem monumental and much more impressive.
Naturally enough, this third temple became famous throughout the ancient world, and tourists flocked to Lydia to marvel at its magnificence. Many of them returned home with a fine souvenir, a copy in silver of the huge statue of Artemis, which was made of gold, ebony, silver, and black stone.
The temple was destroyed in the 3rd century AD, and after that it was never rebuilt. It was too expensive to be done easily, and of course the rise of Christianity made it increasingly inappropriate to do anything like that, so that it remained there outside the city of Ephesus, and not surprisingly began to be used as a quarry.
Pliny the Elder also described the fifth wonder of the ancient world, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. Like the pyramids, this too was a tomb built by Artemisia for her husband Mausolus, the ruler of Caria in Turkey. Completed in 351 BC, it was, of course, huge. It measured 410 feet all round, with 36 columns round the outside and a pyramid of 24 steps leading to the top. There, the architect of the mausoleum, Pythios, placed a marble sculpture of a chariot drawn by 4 horses. There were other sculptures too, a 10-foot-high statue of Mausolus and a frieze or band of carvings showing Greeks fighting the Amazons, the famous female warriors of Greek legend.
The mausoleum at Halicarnassus was also found in a fairly poor condition when it was excavated in the 19th century. Up until the 16th century, it seems to have survived quite substantially, but then a great deal of its material was removed by the Knights of St. John at Malta, who had a large castle at Bodrum, either in order to build the castle itself or in order to make mortar to hold the walls together. Some fragments from the mausoleum have been found actually in the castle, but a lot of it has just disappeared forever.
In 305 BC, a Greek army, commanded by Demetrius, the son of one of Alexander the Great's generals, attacked the city of Rhodes. A long and terrible siege followed. This went on for 2 years, until in 304 BC, Demetrius and his army gave up. 12 years after the end of the siege, the citizens of Rhodes decided to erect a huge monument to their success, the Colossus of Rhodes, which became the sixth wonder of the ancient world. The sculptor Chares, who lived in Lindos, another city on the island of Rhodes, was put in charge of constructing the Colossus, which depicted the sun god Helios. Some archaeologists believe that Chares made Helios with one hand shielding his eyes, as if looking out to sea for signs of invading enemies. As its name suggests, the Colossus, which comes from the Greek word for something gigantic, was of enormous size, nearly 200 feet high. Its thumbs were so huge that, according to Pliny, no one could put their arms around them. Pliny also wrote that Chares worked on it for 12 years before it was finished. Many pictures drawn later have shown the Colossus straddling the entrance to the harbor at Rhodes, with one foot planted on each side and ships sailing beneath it.
What I think is fairly clear is that the idea that it straddled the harbour is quite impossible. It would have had to have had a spread of something of several hundred metres to be able to do that, and clearly no statue in the ancient world, especially when we have some dimensions from ancient writers, could have done that. It may have stood by the harbour, although that's been disputed. Perhaps more likely is that it actually stood away from the harbour a little way in the sanctuary of the god Helios.
Like the Colossus, the seventh and last wonder of the ancient world stood at the entrance to a harbor, the harbor of Alexandria in Egypt. This was the city built in 332 BC by the famous Greek commander Alexander the Great, and it was named after him. Alexandria was the capital of Egypt for nearly 1,000 years, until 642 AD, when Egypt was conquered by the Muslim Arabs. It was also a very busy port, and in about 280 BC, the pharaoh, Ptolemy II, decided to build a lighthouse on the small island of Pharos so that ships could be safely guided into the harbor. Like the other wonders of the ancient world, the Pharos of Alexandria, as the lighthouse was called, was an amazing piece of technology. It stood 360 feet high and was constructed in 3 stages. The first was square, the second was octagonal with 8 sides, and the top was round. Here a fire burned at night and could be seen far out to sea by approaching ships.
Now, the engineering feat's not merely in building the lighthouse, but if one thinks about it, of keeping that beacon going, because beacons need fuel. This beacon is a long way up in the air. There must be a constant trail of people carrying the fuel up to keep this beacon running. It's still very remarkable indeed. It is a massive construction, and it would have been no easy thing to keep that beacon aflame.
The Pharos of Alexandria, like all the 7 wonders except for the pyramids, became a lost treasure of the ancient world a very long time ago. Today, a few small remnants or ruins remain, like the single column at Ephesus, which is all that is left of the once great temple of Artemis. Even so, the idea of the 7 wonders lived on, and people were still making new lists of them in the 8th century AD. In fact, the 7 wonders we recognize today were not finalized until the time of the Renaissance, in the 15th century. Some of the wonders have left their mark on the modern world. Queen Artemis of Caria, for instance, was determined that her husband's tomb, the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, should be the largest and most magnificent in the world. It was. And today, any great tomb, especially those built for famous people, is called a mausoleum. The Pharos of Alexandria proved to be the model for all lighthouses built after it, and its name has even entered some languages. The Romans called a lighthouse Pharos in Latin. Today, in Italian and Spanish, a lighthouse is faro. In French, it is phare. In addition, the way in which Phidias made his ivory and wood statue of Zeus look like a living, breathing human being was copied by artists and sculptors many centuries later. Even today, our ideas of what statues of people should look like are influenced by Phidias' sculpture. But even though nothing remains of the great masterpiece he created at Olympia, one very small but very personal memento of Phidias has been found. In 1958, German archaeologists uncovered the great sculptor's workshop. There, they found a broken cup, and on it, there was a message. Phideo imi, it said in Greek. I belong to Phidias.